I woke up in a bed that smelled like expensive cologne and cold, hard lies. The sheets were silk. The room was completely silent. And my clothes were folded neatly on a velvet chair I didn't recognize. Beside me lay a man whose face I had never seen before in my life. He had a faint scar on his collarbone and a wedding ring on his finger. That definitely wasn't mine. Dear listeners, before I began telling this complicated story of my life, I ask you to support my channel. Subscribe. This is very important for us. And now, enjoy listening. I thought it was just a one-night stand, a moment of absolute weakness to forget the man who had just shattered my heart into a million jagged pieces. But then, the stranger opened his eyes. He didn't look confused. He didn't look surprised. He looked at me with a terrifying, twisted kind of recognition, and he whispered, "You're finally back. I've been waiting 3 years for you to wake up." That was the moment I realized that last night wasn't a mistake. It was a trap. Let's go back 12 hours, to the moment my life ended. My name is Alena. I was supposed to be celebrating my 5th anniversary with Marcus, my perfect high school sweetheart. I had the candles lit, but when I walked into our bedroom to surprise him, I was the one who got the surprise. I found him with my best friend. The betrayal didn't scream, it hissed. It felt like a cold blade sliding between my ribs, twisting until I couldn't breathe. I didn't say a word. I didn't throw a fit. I just walked out into the pouring Manhattan rain and kept going until my lungs burned and my feet bled. I ended up at a place called the Gilded Cage. It's the kind of bar where the lights are dim enough to hide a broken soul. That's where I met him, Julian. He didn't ask for my name. He didn't ask why I was soaking wet or why I looked like I'd seen a ghost. He just looked at me with eyes that seemed to count every crack in my heart. He told me that the worst part isn't the lie itself. It's the fact that you feel stupid for being the only one who didn't see it coming. His voice was like velvet over gravel. I was raw. I was hurting. I wanted to be anyone else, anywhere else. We didn't talk about our pasts. We just burned. Slowly, Julian walked toward me. He stopped, just inches from my face, his dark eyes locked onto mine. He reached out with a warm, steady hand and gently wiped a stray raindrop from my lower lip. He tilted my chin up, leaning in until his lips brushed against mine, just a ghost of a touch. A teasing taste that made my breath catch, before he pulled back slightly, just to see how much I wanted him. My heart was racing from the heartbreak, but his proximity started a different kind of fire. I felt a sudden, consuming greed for affection, a desperate desire for attention. I needed to feel anything other than the pain Marcus left me with. Julian pulled me closer, burying his fingers into my wet hair, and kissed me this time deeply, hungrily, and with a fierce intensity that stole the remaining air from my lungs. It was the kind of kiss that makes you forget your own name. We ended up back at his penthouse, and the heat between us only intensified. Everything became a breathless blur of tangled silk sheets, heavy shadows, whispered promises in the dark. For hours, I let myself get completely lost in the overwhelming intimacy of this stranger. He pressed me flat against the mattress, his lips tracing a path down my jawline to the hollow of my throat, making me gasp. He touched every single part of my body as if he were memorizing a map he'd been studying for years, pulling me against his bare chest until our hearts beat in a chaotic sync. In that darkness, under the weight of his body and his breathless kisses, I felt cherished. I felt safe. I didn't know I was sleeping with the architect of my own destruction. But when the sun hit the floorboards this morning, the dream didn't just end, it turned into a nightmare. I stood in the bathroom, staring at my reflection. My neck had a faint, dark bruise from where his lips had lingered so fiercely. I looked shaken. I reached for my phone to call a cab, to run away from the shame. In its place was a burner phone with a single contact saved. The truth? I walked back into the bedroom, expecting to see Julian sleeping. Instead, I saw the walls. They were covered in framed photos. I walked over, thinking I'd see his family. Instead, I saw myself. There were photos of me at the park 3 years ago. Me sleeping in a house I didn't even recognize. Me at my wedding with Marcus. But Marcus's face had been violently cut out of every single frame with a razor blade. Julian was standing in the doorway, watching me with a chillingly calm smile. He told me he'd been paying Marcus to keep me alive. He said Marcus didn't just cheat, he'd been selling pieces of my life to the highest bidder for years. I wanted to scream, but he threw a folder on the bed. Inside were medical records. My medical records. Apparently, I'd been treated for memory loss and trauma 3 years ago. Records I didn't even know existed. He claimed Marcus had been drugging my coffee for months to keep me compliant. He told me I hadn't stumbled into his bar by accident. He had retrieved me. My mind was a mess of insecurity and fear. Was Marcus really a monster? I remembered the constant fog in my head, the headaches. Julian sat me down on the edge of the bed, pulling me firmly into his lap. He pressed a soft kiss to my forehead, then trailed his lips back down to my neck, kissing right over the dark mark he'd left during our passionate night. He begged me to stay. He promised me wealth, protection, and a love I'd been starved of. He said he'd waited 3 long years to get me back. For a few minutes, the obsession felt like love. I let him hold me against his chest. But then, the mask slipped. Curiosity is the only thing stronger than fear. While Julian was in the shower, I found a hidden safe behind a painting in his study. The code was my birthday. Inside wasn't evidence against Marcus. It was a contract. I read the words, and the world tilted. It was a life ownership agreement. It stated that Julian had purchased my identity from Marcus. 3 years ago, after an accident, I couldn't even remember. I wasn't his lover. I was his property. My breath hitched. The shock was total. The stranger I had been so intensely intimate with wasn't a savior. He was a collector. The betrayal from Marcus was a paper cut. This was a decapitation. I heard the shower stop. I tried to lock the safe, but I dropped a heavy gold coin. Absolute silence followed. Then, the sound of Julian whistling our anniversary song as he walked down the hall. I hid behind the heavy velvet curtains, my heart beating so loud I thought he'd hear it through the fabric. He entered the room and told the empty air to stop playing the victim, that I always loved the drama, and that's why they picked me. I realized I couldn't run. I had to play the part of the broken woman a little longer. I stepped out from the curtains. I asked him why Marcus kept me for 3 years if he'd already sold me. Julian told me Marcus was just greedy, but that tonight the deal was finally closed. That's when the truth completely flipped. A knock came at the door. Marcus walked in. He wasn't looking for his wife. He didn't look guilty. He walked straight to the bar, poured a drink, and asked Julian if I had signed the papers yet. My soul went cold. They weren't enemies. They were business partners. The cheating I discovered was staged to drive me into Julian's arms. They needed me to willingly sign a document, transferring my family's hidden estate to Julian so they could split the cash. Marcus looked at me and said he was sorry, but that I was worth way more as a ghost than a wife. I was trapped between the man I had loved for a decade and the man I had slept with last night. The insecurity was a physical pain. Was I really that disposable? Was my entire life just a series of transactions? I collapsed. I let the tears fall. I let them see me break. They stood over me, discussing how they would put me in a facility where I wouldn't remember any of this in a month. They thought I was a victim. They thought because I was a storyteller, I couldn't handle the real world. I stopped crying. I wiped my face and looked up. My eyes were no longer filled with tears. They were predatory. I looked at Marcus, then at Julian. I reached into my dress and pulled out a small, high-tech recording device that had been active since the moment I entered the bar. I told them they were right. I do love a good story. But I told them they forgot one thing. About the innocent wife they've been drugging. I haven't taken those vitamins Marcus gave me in 6 months. I knew about the affair. I knew about the debt. And I told Julian I didn't stumble into his bar, I built it. My grandfather didn't just leave me money. He left me a private security firm. I hadn't been bought. I'd been auditing them. Last night wasn't me falling helplessly for him. It was me gathering the final physical and DNA evidence I needed right from his own bedsheets. The penthouse doors were kicked open. Tactical teams swarmed the room. Marcus and Julian were tackled to the floor. The look of absolute shock on their faces was the most addictive thing I'd ever felt. Julian tried to cry out that last night felt real, that our intimacy couldn't have been a lie. I just leaned in close, my lips inches from his ear one last time, and told him that the best lies are always wrapped in a little bit of truth. I walked out of the penthouse, my silhouette framed by the morning sun. I took the wedding ring off my finger and dropped it into a puddle of dirty rainwater. I slept with a stranger to end a nightmare. Now, I'm the one they'll be dreaming about when they close their eyes in a concrete cell. They thought they owned the narrative, but I'm the one who wrote the ending. Would you have played the game?